You guys track storage, so first we'll hit your wheelhouse as well. The president's talking about releasing the SPR, but around the world offshore, is there enough storage to bring down prices, or are we really in sort of OPEC's grip?
Hey, good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to getting back together. What's really interesting from our data as OPEC kind of goes into the meeting this week is that exports are lower than I would have expected. And I say that because you would think that the stars have been kind of aligned for higher exports from these countries. Demand is better. Inventories are drawing down. The group's own policy has been to increase production every month, 400,000 barrels per day. And that's what we're expecting this time as well. And obviously the price environment has been very robust. I think that's been covered on your air. What's really interesting though in our data is that if you back out Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the other 22 countries of OPEC Plus actually decreased their combined export levels by about 1 million barrels per day since April.
Wow.
So I asked myself, why aren't these guys selling more oil? They've got the fiscal imperative to maximize revenue. They've got supportive prices. They've even got politicians from Washington to Tokyo to New Delhi asking for more. So I think that one thing that we have to ask ourselves as a hypothesis is, do some of these countries really have the capacity to add much more from here? I think that the spare capacity level around the world is something we have to watch.
You're the guest, but I'll answer your question. We're flipping roles here. It's like pardon the interruption or something. I've talked to a couple people recently who said, no, to your point, that maybe only the Saudis and the UAE have the ability to sell more oil. Now, the Saudis have the ability to sell a lot, but these other countries like Kuwait in particular, to answer your hypothesis, other people I've talked to said they simply don't. So to expect OPEC to suddenly start throwing a bunch of oil on the market may not just be unfeasible, but not impossible, but much harder than we believe unless the Saudis go their own way.
I think that's right. And really the key metric that we have to look at here is spare production capacity around the world, but particularly in those OPEC countries. And we think that it's probably kind of at the low end of the range that's sort of bandied about somewhere between 3 and 5 million barrels per day. And remember that those countries within that group that are struggling to produce at their target level, they don't really want the quotas to increase from here because they're not going to be able to participate and to contribute. So, right, as we watch demand rebound, exports pretty flat from those guys despite a bull tape, and we've still got medium to long-term supply growth that's limited by ESG, by decarbonization policies that are being talked about this week, and by investor discipline from the street. I think it's reasonable to see upside price potential for crude oil.
Is 120 bucks Brent? Maybe that's just sort of one of these headline grabbing numbers. I've seen other people that are above 100, Clay. I talked to somebody yesterday who said, let's get ready for it. Oil's not going away anytime soon, but the era of cheap oil and the cheap hydrocarbon is. Because if you're going to slam an industry and say, we're going to wind you down over the next 20 years, they're going to make as much money on those next 20 as they possibly can. Your take on that?
Yeah, it's not only about making as much money, but it's about, for all of the companies and organizations that go into energy production, it's about supplying the world with what it needs now and in the near term. And so we do need hydrocarbons in the near term in order to support economic activity around the world. I'll tell you, as kind of 20 plus years as an oil market observer, there's nothing magical about 3 digits. I am old enough to remember 2008, $147 a barrel we touched. And I think the annual average that year in 08 was $98 a barrel. So it's definitely possible. Yeah. I'm not calling for it on your show today, but I'm saying we definitely could be on either side of 100 as we figure out how supply is going to meet continuing demand for energy.